Ms. 501, Ms. Radcliffe, can you read us in with the introduction, please?
Will do. Thank you for joining us this evening for the July 27th, 2021 Monte Sereno City Council special meeting. Before this meeting is called to order, I would like to point out a few house rules to assist council members, staff, and members of the public to successfully participate in this meeting. Council members, your microphone is live, so please keep your microphones on mute until you wish to speak. For tonight's meeting, we are using Zoom to host the special meeting. At the bottom of the Zoom client, there are two icons, chat and raise hand. Please use chat only to report technical issues such as being unable to hear a council member speaking. Please use raise hand to be recognized by the mayor and enabled to speak to the council. To comment under oral communication or on any agenda item, you are allowed 3 minutes to speak per agenda item. Emails limited to 350 words can also be submitted to the city clerk and it will be read into the record. This word limit is set to adhere to the typical 3-minute time allowance. Only attendees using the Zoom application can use the raise hand option to comment. Participants calling in from a telephone will only be able to listen and cannot provide feedback or public comment. Lastly, because we are all not in the same room, all votes at this meeting will be taken by roll call.
Okay, thank you. Roll call, please.
Councilmember Mekachek.
Present.
Councilmember Lawler.
Present.
Councilmember Turner is not present. Mayor Pro Tem Elahi.
Present.
And Mayor Luthold.
Present.
We have a quorum.
Thank you. Assuming no changes to the orders of the day, if there are any, Mr. Leonardis or Ms. Radcliffe, please let us know. Otherwise, we will go forward with new business.
Yeah, no changes.
Okay, new business. Today's special meeting is to consider approval of the contract with Municipal Resource Group, MRG, for an amount not to exceed $7,500 for a city manager performance evaluation process. And so this comes out of the closed session last time, and then having the city attorney proceed to reach out to determine if MRG could conduct this and what the cost would be, and to bring back a proposed contract to us. That has now been done and attached. And I believe we have someone here from MRG. Do we have Mr. Rudin or anyone who is going to introduce this for us?
Yes, I'll just give that was a wonderful summary, and I'm not sure I need to expound further. I do believe we have Nadine from MRG here, who would be the person who would be responsible for, conducting the substance of the evaluation and providing the recommendations and report as referenced in the contract. I'll let Nadine speak to the scope of work.
All right, thank you. If we can recognize Nadine Levin, and then she can give us some background, and then if council members have questions about this, we can go ahead and jump in with the council member questions before we move to formal discussion among the council.
All right, thank you. I want to make sure you can hear me. I've had some trouble with the speakers. You can hear me?
Yes, very good.
Okay, thank you. I'll just take you through the scope of work that we have proposed. And again, we're open to changing it, to customizing it. The first part of the process, since you would be a new client in the context of doing the city manager evaluation, is for us to meet with the mayor or the subcommittee to review the process, highlight key dates, and communicate expectations of the council, the city manager, and our firm. Again, as I just said, we can customize the process. I personally have done over the last few years, close to 20, 25 evaluations of council appointees. So the process normally, and as we proposed it, is to begin with talking to the city manager, providing him an opportunity and giving him a template to prepare a self-evaluation. We would then have a survey prepared with its questions on attributes and expectations of the council. That survey would be confidential without any attribution, usually through SurveyMonkey. And that would be each council member completing it. And again, it's without attribution. I am the only one that sees that information. And then, and my understanding is you are interested in a 360 feedback or input from your employees. So we would have a separate survey from them, and again, without attribution. I would gather the insight and input, and then I would have one-on-one conversations with each council member to give me a little bit more information than I perhaps have gotten through the survey. When all that data and information is available, I would prepare 2 reports. One, the council input, and it would speak to themes, it would speak to issues that you think are going very well, areas that you think there could be some future development or further professional development, and also another report with the staff input. We would then meet in closed session with the council to discuss the reports. Council would give me direction on changes they might like to see. I would then finalize that report and prepare the council to meet with the city manager in a closed session to discuss that information. And at the end of that, I would finalize the process and meet with the council or the subcommittee and the city manager to discuss what went right with the process, what could be improved, and if there are any other issues that we can help with. So that's essentially the scope of work.
Great, thank you very much. Any council member questions? Mr. Mekachek.
So I may be a little late for this since I did not attend the closed session. So in terms of the scope of work, this seems to be an annual performance appraisal, and we council are essentially getting a third party to conduct this on our behalf, which would be similar to what we did ourselves in-house last year for the evaluation year ending December 31, 2020. In addition to what we did last year, it would include a 360-degree survey. And it would also include an independent report to council. Do I understand that correctly?
So yeah, let me address that. I think you have the general gist of it correct. We did do the performance evaluation around the beginning of the year. And coming out of that, there were some performance indications and areas of concern. Since then, several things have arisen such that it seems to make sense to have this conducted by an outside professional as opposed to just an in-house survey of council members. And so, yes, it can be looked at as either a continuation of the performance review, an update of it, or a separate process, but treating it as a review process with the independent outside review, which allows for the investigation in the form of the 360 evaluation and really brings in a professional who does this as a full-time job.
I understand. So when would the engagement start, and what is the quote performance year or the period covered under this engagement?
So I don't think that we have defined it as a performance year per se. I do know that the city manager has raised his concern that he didn't receive a salary increase last time. The process in the past with the January review doesn't really lend itself to that because it's in the middle of a budget year. So this is actually on a much more appropriate schedule as we enter into the new budget year to be conducting the review. But most important, I think the result, if I understand the result coming out of the last closed session, is that there appear to be performance issues that need to be looked into and addressed, and that council as a group feels it's appropriate to do so now, despite it not being on the calendar year evaluation cycle, but that this appeared to be the right tool.
And I will sort of point out that the city manager's contract provides that the city will do performance evaluations annually around July. Now, I understand for various reasons, potentially including COVID, that schedule was not adhered to in the prior year cycle. And with respect to the question of, what is the evaluation period, at present, that's not specified in the draft contract. I would recommend that, if the council has a particular evaluation period that is not simply, performance since the last evaluation, which was in January, that the council specify that if it, wants to look at a different period, and we can, approve that with that amendment to the scope of work. But, absent some sort of express provision, I would generally understand, and Nadine can correct me if I'm wrong here, that she would likely be looking at, recent, conducting an evaluation based on whatever has been happening recently since the council last completed their cycle.
Yeah, and one other thing that we did discuss as a council previously, both at the hiring of the city manager and was reiterated last time, I believe, by Councilmember Lawler, was that we all felt that it was appropriate, actually, with a new city manager without experience as a city manager, to conduct performance reviews more frequently as a way to provide feedback and checking in to make sure that we are all having our expectations met and setting expectations appropriately.
So I understand. Thank you for clarifying that. If we were to do this performance appraisal, and it strikes me that the timeline would be January 1 through to June 30th, or to today's date, then we should have maybe a performance year so that we can evaluate the performance and adjust the compensation so that it coincides with our fiscal year. Am I starting to understand that correctly? In which case we would do another one, say, in May of 2022, so that we can have a compensation adjustment for July 1st, 2022, or would we do it as of maybe April 30 or April 15? April 15th is that day, or March 31, so that we could consider that we could get it into the budget cycle for the fiscal year starting July 1, 2022. Could you help me understand that, please?
So I can give you my best guesstimate as to that. In my discussions with MRG, my understanding is that this evaluation process is going to take them approximately 6 weeks to complete. That would probably put, the council's discussion of whether or not salary increases are warranted and, potentially what they should be, at some point in September or October, I would expect. And so the idea of whether or not a salary increase is warranted is usually tied to a performance evaluation, but the time that you decide to grant it is, a discretionary decision by the council. So a lot of cities will tie it to the end of a budget year, but nothing would prohibit you from giving a mid-year, salary increase if the conditions warranted, provided you have the money in your budget or you revise your budget to do so.
Yeah, and Councilmember Makachek, I would suggest that actually one of the things that will probably help guide us coming out of the MRG report would be some recommendations about that and whether we should be looking and what we should be looking at for setting up the follow-on review cycle. I think the content of the review may give us pointers on that if we want a more quick turnaround on reviewing certain items. And also what you're saying makes sense to me as one council member here, that we might very well want to do this in late spring near the budget cycle. But I think that's something the council can talk about as we come out of this and have this experience.
Thank you. I have a question for Ms. Levine. My question is, you mentioned you've done this for quite a few different clients. Can you, for the last 5 that you did, how many employees did each of those 5 municipalities have, please?
Okay. Okay. So let me tell you what I'm doing right now, and that'll help you. I'm doing the review for the CEO of Silicon Valley Clean Energy Authority. They have 26 authorized. They have 20 employees right now. I've recently finished Half Moon Bay. My number, I'm remembering without looking at it, is somewhere around 18 to 22 employees. Carmel is another city that I have done recently. Carmel had about 25 to 30 employees. And again, I'm pulling this from my memory. Let's see, who else can I think of? Sunnyvale is another client that I have done for about 6 years. Obviously, they have a lot of employees. Now, what I will tell you is that the larger jurisdictions, we don't take input from all employees. Larger jurisdictions, what we do is we make sure that classifications are represented in departments. It's really difficult for us, and it's cost prohibitive often for a client for us to do a large number of employees. For example, I think the most I have ever had participate in a survey is about 30 employees. So does that answer your question?
Yes, that does. And that's interesting that you mentioned Silicon Valley Clean Energy, because Mayor Pro Tem Elahi is our representative on SVCD. So my next question is, what's the smallest municipality in terms of the number of employees that you've worked with and done such a review?
That would probably be Half Moon Bay and Carmel. Those would be the smallest.
And you said Carmel was 25 to 30.
That's what my memory is telling me, somewhere like around that.
Okay, so we would be an order of magnitude smaller than your smallest client.
That's correct.
Got it. I have no further questions.
Well, but may I offer just one more piece of information? And we've had some clients say, do this. I understand that you have, my assumption is that you're also a contract city. And at times, councils have sought to include a representative of the contractor, be it the sheriff's office, fire department, as part of the 360. So some cities have done that as well. If they're not an actual city employee, but they're representing the contract agency, they've included them as well.
Thank you. So with that as a follow-on, is your fee based on the number of interviews that you're doing? And the reason why I'm asking that is we've got probably, that I can think of, 2 key other stakeholders, if you will, one being Los Gatos Monte Sereno PD, and the other being the county fire. And I would defer to the other council members if there's other folks that should be involved, and maybe this is too much detail for a public meeting, I'm not sure.
Well, what I will say is the staff or contract representative is not an interview. It is participation in the survey. The interviews are tied, the one-on-one interviews are with the council members. The input that we receive from staff feedback is through the survey process. And we could accommodate more stakeholders in that process.
Thank you.
All right, thank you. Councilmember Lawler, any questions?
No, not at this time. Are we going to just discuss it from now on, or?
Well, I was going to just move through and see if Mayor Pro Tem Elahi has any questions he wanted to ask specifically, and then we'll move to discussion.
Yeah,
All right.
I would add public comment before discussion.
All right, thank you.
yeah,
Questions?
I don't know if I, I don't think I have any specific questions. I think we'll have a discussion on the subjects that have been discussed. So
All right.
I'll wait for that.
All right, thank you. All right, let's go ahead and then move to public comment. If we have anyone who would wish to speak on this, please raise your hand to be recognized. Seeing none, I will close public comment, and we will now move to council discussion. So, council members, discussion. Ms. Lawler.
Well, okay, thank you. I was going to wait to see what how it all went, but I did want to ask you, when we had determined that this would be agendized for August 3rd. So I'm not quite sure why the urgency in calling a meeting a week earlier, given how long it takes, 6 weeks anyway to do a 360. So I'm a little concerned about the optics on that. I'm afraid it's sending a wrong message, and it just makes me concerned. And I'm wondering, I'm completely for a 360 review. I think they're great. So I'm very supportive of that idea, but I'm thinking that we should probably get a couple of other bids so that this does not appear to be predetermined. In the interest of being completely transparent, perhaps we should go get a couple more bids from a couple other agencies first, and then we can proceed. I think that would be prudent. Thank you.
Right. Thank you. Let me just answer. My understanding coming out of the meeting was that we were going to try to get this underway as quickly as possible, since there certainly appeared to be some urgency to move forward. And so as soon as it was apparent that the contract could be brought back, I went ahead and made the decision to bring it back. Also, on the August 3rd meeting, we have plenty of other things there. So that was the intention, is not to rush anything, but certainly to bring it back as soon as possible, get it in front of us for discussion. So it may have been my misunderstanding if there was an actual consensus that it should be August 3rd. My understanding was as soon as possible. So I apologize. Okay, other discussion. Mr. Mayor Pro Tem Elahi.
Yeah, I think we have a good a person who's very, very experienced in this area. In fact, I had nominated her since I was familiar with her work at Silicon Valley. But we left it to our council, so Mr. Rudin, to identify somebody. And I don't know if Mr. Rudin talked to anybody else also or not. If you can illuminate us on that.
No, short answer was no. But I did reach out to my colleagues who, recommended other consultants. And, I asked what the typical rates were for this type of work, and the proposal seemed consistent. And in light of Councilmember Elahi's recommendation of this firm and his experience with them, I thought that moving forward with this would be reasonable.
Yeah, so I'm concerned about Councilmember Lawless saying it raises the wrong optics. So I don't know if that is because I had nominated this particular individual or if it's for some other reason. So I'm firmly comfortable with going back and looking for somebody else. But if we're going to move forward, I think there are issues that are out there that need to be taken care of, and they seem to be getting worse over the last couple of weeks, unfortunately. So that's would be my thought.
All right, Councilmember Makachek.
Well, first of all, it seems like the firm that we're considering engaging, I'm fine with that. I'm quite happy with that. I'm wondering that if we're rushing into this and we haven't sort of thought it through and how it fits into the budget process, the evaluation process, etc. But I do find a lot of value in having a baseline measurement. And I was wondering if perhaps Ms. Levine could just, if we could narrow the scope down for a 360-degree review, because that's the last that I recall hearing. And considering that we did have a review as of December 30th or end of January, we haven't had a 360-degree review ever in the history of the city of Monte Sereno, to the best of my knowledge and belief. And probably city manager Leonardis would probably spend more time and effort on his evaluation than the last probably 5 evaluations of the city manager in cumulative. But I think if we were to have a 360-degree review baseline, that would be very helpful for the full year review whenever that should occur. Those are kind of some of my thoughts. And I would agree with Councilmember Lawler that the optics of this to be reacting to something, and I'm not exactly sure if that's warranted at this point in time.
Thank you. I do. Let me address. I want to make it clear that this, and without revealing closed session content, this is not purely or even primarily reactive. There are other issues that justify and really reinforce the need, again, for outside professional engagement in this process. And as you mentioned, Councilmember Makachek, the idea of 360 and some baseline there. This is not something that Monte Sereno did in the past, but it certainly is something that a professional organization should be doing more of. And this is round 1 of having a 360. The other comment that I have is in terms of Councilmember Lawler's comment about potentially kind of getting multiple bids and all. I think we're talking about really a decreasing return on our investment of time and energy on that. I think we all wish that it was a couple $1,000s less than it is, but we're going to spend a couple $1,000s of city attorney time going out and soliciting additional bidders when we know that we have one who is appears to be very competent and very right-sized in the sense of having experience with smaller jurisdictions. I'm not sure, Councilmember Makachek pointed it out well, I'm not sure there is a smaller jurisdiction in the state than ours, but it sounds like MRG has dealt with small, which is important. So.
I will say that in terms of the council's authority to approve this contract, given the dollar size, this contract is exempt from bidding requirements under Chapter 205 of the City Code. It's just too small of a dollar amount that the City Code does not require any sort of competitive procurement.
Thank you. All right, Councilmember Lawler, kind of cycle back to you, just moving around. I know you don't have your hand up, but I want to put you on the spot.
Well, thank you for that. Yeah, so my interest really was making sure that we appeared that we were doing our due diligence. It's not that I'm not happy with the contract that we have. I think it's more about showing the community that we did our research before we jumped into something. And I don't care for knee-jerk reactions. I do think we need to think this through. I'm all, like I said, I'm all for it. We should definitely go forward with the 360. I just want to make sure that we are, for all appearances, this is not something that appears to be predetermined, that we have done the homework, we've looked at others, and then we will ultimately, I like this firm. I mean, it's not that I'm saying we're not going with this firm. It's just, that's where I'm coming from. Thanks.
All right, thank you. Mayor Pro Tem Elahi.
Yeah, I appreciate the Councilmember Lawrence concern, but I think on these kind of contracts, when you have the right firm with the kind of experience that she has, I think Councilmember Mekachek is also familiar with the work that they do. I think you got a good person. So, like Mayor Pro Tem and like Mayor Luthol was saying, it's a question of diminishing returns. I also wanted to be clear that this should really, it would be helpful to have a base 360 setup. And while we did some kind of a review, I don't think it qualifies as a 360 review. I would prefer that this base be set up from the day Mr. Linares started with us, so that we have the entire gambit, so that when we do the review this time and then we do the review on Mr. Linares next year, we really have something to compare with. So because the review that we did, we're not experienced reviewers ourselves. And I think it left a lot to be desired, both for what we did and what Mr. Linares expected from us. So I would keep it that base. And if you guys are comfortable with this particular firm at this time, like they say, don't let perfection be the enemy of good. So, it may not be the perfect answer, but if you're comfortable with the firm that's out there, I don't have a personal relationship with this firm. I only have a relationship with them as being on the board of directors of Silicon Valley Clean Energy and nothing else. So I'm not really sure why there's such a big concern on transparency coming up now at this particular point. I hope it doesn't have to do with just because I nominated her or thought about her. Mr. Rudin did screen up, did ask around and find out what's going on, and would not have recommended somebody that he thought would be biased in some manner. So I would suggest let's go forward with it. We've already done, I have a meeting today. Maybe it should have been next week, but it's happened. We're here. Let's move forward with it.
All right, Councilmember Mekachek, any thoughts on that?
Yes. I appreciate the comments from everyone, and I'm perfectly fine with moving forward. It's just, again, the scope. I would put forth that the discussions that we had in January and thereafter have been fairly robust, and the only thing missing was a 360 review. And let's be perfectly clear that the work that was done, the evaluation in January, in no way, shape, or form included a 360-degree review. And I think that there's value in that. And again, I would ask that we reduce the scope to simply a 360-degree review. At this point in time, we move forward. That gives us a baseline for the next full performance evaluation. Maybe we would engage the same firm to do that full review in the future, which I would be comfortable with. But to do a full review right now, to me, I don't see the value in it, but I certainly, once again, to repeat myself, see the value in a 360-degree review to do an evaluation right now as a baseline.
Yes, Ms. Lawler.
That makes sense. I agree with that. I agree with Councilmember Mekachek.
So I'm not sure, I want to be clear. I understand what people are saying when you say limit scope to a 360 review, and what that is different from. Is that saying that you're interested in having employee feedback but not having council member concerns addressed, not addressing anything that's occurred in the last 6 months? I don't understand.
So a 360 review is in all directions, so above and below, direct reports, peers, and people that the city manager would report to. but it just strikes me that the scope seems too broad. And just a sec, to do a self-evaluation and a survey of council, and then also a 360-degree review. I think that Ms. Levine had mentioned that as a separate line item, and maybe she could answer that question. You know, would it be, is a 360-degree survey / review, does it include all the interviews? And does it need to include all the interviews to have a mid-year baseline?
So let me, I want to make sure I understand. The 360 would be a survey of the employees, and as you mentioned, or was mentioned, contractors, one individual from each, be it the police, fire, sanitary, whatever you contract for. There would be the survey. It would not include council interviews or council completing a survey. So it would not include, at least talking about the 360, it would not include council input.
Thank you. That's where I think there's a little bit of a disconnect between what Councilmember Mekachek was describing and his understanding of 360, which included the people above as well as the employees and contractors below the city manager. So it sounds like the way this firm has defined it is the 360 is much more the survey side, the downward looking, outward looking, and the council, the above part is based on the interviews and concerns above, and that they've split it out that way. So it's just kind of a matter of the wording on this. Yes, Councilmember Lawler.
So my recollection is the reason we had the closed session to begin with was to address staff. So I look at this as, in addition to the review that we did in January, as sort of an addendum, right? Because Councilmember or Mayor Pro Tem Elahi had mentioned he had really desired a 360 at that point. And I think if we just view it as tacking it on to our previous review as an addition, I see that as, then it could be counted as this year's review. Does that make sense?
So what you're saying makes a certain amount of sense. The concern being the council in January, what we'll call the January review, indicated areas of performance improvement and some specifics about that. And you mentioned more frequent review might be beneficial. Certainly, as one council member, I have concerns about the performance in the last 6 months and the response to the very specific performance goals. And I think we are in need of reviewing whether or not anything comes out of that, whether there are actionable performance goals, and how we make sure that we are, as a council, seeing the performance of the city manager that we expect for our city manager. And if that needs a half-yearly check-in, as we discussed, it might need these more frequent check-ins, then I think we need to give the benefit of everyone's input, top-down and bottom-up. And I think also, speaking to Mr. Leonardis's self-review, self-evaluation, he provided us with his outline of that last time, although it was perhaps not in a formal format. It was more a accomplishments and Ms. Levine's firm may have more of a format that they are able to provide, again, to get this on baseline, to set the expectations. We have a city manager who hasn't done the city manager position before. The evaluation was done by the council. which is, as we all know, a young council without a lot of experience doing this process and working from a template that we all agreed had room for improvement. So I think the way I see it is we should do it now and we should do it right, because otherwise we're not doing right by the citizens. And that's the other issue which we haven't included in this, which is any sort of citizen input into this process. Now, we probably don't have the time and budget for that, but that's something certainly a city satisfaction survey and measurable metrics and so forth are things that we're going to want to address as a council going forward. Because ultimately, this is not about anything personal with anyone here. This is about serving the citizens of Monte Sereno in a positive way, making sure that we have the city council knowledgeable about what we're doing and accomplishing, and making sure that we have a city manager who's being given the guidance correctly from the city council as well. So I see this as a very important thing to do. This is why I believe there's the urgency involved. I think we need to make sure that we get on track and move ahead as a council on track. Yes, Mr. Mekachuk.
Now, if I reflect back, and I moved into the city of Monte Sereno in 1997, I think that we're probably in better shape today than we've been since June of 1997. And so operationally, I don't see maybe the burning need to do this right away. I do see the need to include input and establish a baseline for the people that report to the city manager and the other contract folks. Because obviously the 5 council members included their input in the January evaluation, as you mentioned. So I just don't see that, and maybe the other council members are seeing something that I don't. But operationally, I can't see anything where we've got this burning need in terms of our revenues, in terms of our expense control, in terms of our customer satisfaction, and call it the resident satisfaction, considering the status of our public works, etc. So maybe I just don't see what some of the other folks are seeing.
Yes, Mayor Pro Tem Elahi.
Yeah, I don't think this is about seeing something wrong. I think what I'd really like to ask Ms. Levine is, bottom line is we want to hopefully get a report from you that tells City Council what we're supposed to be doing so that we have the best possible run city and we have the best possible city manager and what the city manager should be doing. So I don't know if that requires just doing survey monkey surveys or whether you actually need to talk to staff people. We only have about 6 or 7 staff people, and get some kind of a confidential direct input as to what's going on. So the city council members, we are missing that. But if you're going to establish a baseline, I'd like to see a really solid baseline where all issues are addressed, and the report you give us is a feedback as to, okay, this is where the city's at, this is where what city council people should be doing, and this is what the city manager should be doing, and so the city needs to be addressed. Is that too broad a report I'm asking for, Ms. Levine? Or,
it's rather broad in that the report will speak to if you were to proceed with the council piece of it, will speak to what council members are seeing is going well, what they would like to see changed, and what they like to see into the future. And you would also see from the staff perspective what they're seeing is, being done well, where they think there's some gaps. So you would get that information. In this type of a review, we as a firm do not say, well, we think that the council should do X. That would be what council would have their discussion based on that report, what they see, they would say, well, I guess we should be moving in this area. The other part of the role that we can play, and some councils wish us to play and not, which is within the scope, is that when the reports are prepared and council is sitting down with their city manager, it's having the role of facilitator, of saying, your city manager has expectations as well. And that's what this process provides for you to be able to hear from him what he's thinking, what he needs from the council perhaps, and what he is seeing himself that he knows he could improve upon. So we can serve that function as well, where the council and city manager have that discussion and together decide what is the course forward and how do we go with it. So that's how this information can be used and what our role can be.
Yeah, I think that would be very helpful. I think that would be very helpful for us to be able to do that, and for you to help us with that.
Yeah, and I think based on that, I mean, I think that role is extremely important, because I think the facilitator can perhaps begin to address the fact that council has concerns, the community has expressed concerns that to various council members that they feel need to be addressed. And other council members may not have concerns and have ideas about how things are going well and can continue to be improved. So I think that's really the heart of all of this. That's certainly, again, why I'm pushing forward on this, is because I'm looking for solutions that get everything moving well. I hear what you're saying, Councilmember Mekachek, about the city being better off than it ever has been. That has been a struggle as council has really worked together through an evolving process and moving from one city manager to another, and now to Mr. Leonardis. And the city council has worked very well throughout that transition, I think, and our city managers have worked with us to move through the transition. So we are here and we have a city that's doing well. I'm doing this because I want to see this doing better. Councilmember Lawler.
Mr. Mayor, if I can make some comments, this is Steve Leonardis, City Manager. Thank you for the discussion. I think it's very good. I, wanted to add one point of interest here, and we've all been through this together. Largely my career in Monte Sereno has been overshadowed by COVID. I mean, since March of 20, we've been operating remotely in a lot of cases. We were without a city clerk, an experienced city clerk, for a number of months. We have, we eventually adopted the telework resolution. We were short of key staff. We made some key personnel changes, which I think was very difficult during this transition. But when I came in, it was a time of transition. Of course, we had, an election. We had a new council member come on board. But there's been a lot of moving parts during the last, I would say, 18 months since I've been on board. And it would be, if you're looking to establish kind of a point to compare, this is kind of an unusual time to compare anything to. Again, I would think that maybe a better time to do something like this would be down the road when we would have a more normal operating environment. But it looks like things with COVID are going to be, we have to still take precautions with that. And I don't know when we will be having every employee in the office from 9 to 5 every single day, and our doors open from 9 to 5 again, and our council member meetings in the chambers and all those kinds of things. So when it comes to resident feedback and those types of things, I haven't heard any significant complaints. I would appreciate if there were items that were within our scope of control, whether they're with our agency partners and such, that those items be viewed, this is my only other point of feedback, be viewed in terms of what do we have control over. If it's a fire department gate that residents want access through and it's only the fire department controls it, there's only so much I can do. If it is a PG&E pole or some issue with the cable company that I mean, we are a point of contact and we can try to serve the residents by getting them in the right direction. But if ultimately we cannot flip the switch for the resident on those types of issues, yet the resident keeps coming back to us, you know, that could reflect badly on us, but it also is beyond the scope of our control sometimes. And all we can do is set the residents' expectations the best we can. So those are my initial comments on the discussion so far. But I think trying to compare, using this as a benchmark in time is difficult. And one other thing I mentioned, we are a small entity. We are an atypical entity. When one talks about city experience and city manager experience and whether that person has the experience or not, keep in mind this city was run by Rosemary Pierce, who was essentially an admin. This city is a very simple model. Going in and overanalyzing it, there's an old expression, paralysis by analysis. I don't know how deep in the weeds you want to get with this city. I mean, we don't have library, we don't have sanitation, we don't have the collection and recycling in-house, we don't have police in-house, we don't have fire in-house. We are not an organization like a San Jose. We have largely a building counter and a planning counter and a little bit of engineering. All the public works items have been handled by me for the last 19 months. So if one were to go on SurveyMonkey and ask 5 or 6 employees a few questions, I'm not sure if that's, you know, I'm not sure how that would come to fruition, being how valuable that can be. So that's my food for thought.
Thank you, Mr.
I'm not
Mayor.
against it because I want to say one more thing. I'm not against it because anything that supports, you know, will help people with their bias, implicit or explicit, I think is a great thing in this day and age because, you know, we did have some issues with a very rogue employee and fortunately that individual has moved on. But I think that, you know, overanalyzing this simple business model, which is running at its best it's ever was, and looking back on the records of, I looked in the previous city manager's file, there was no record of any employee evaluations ever, that management evaluations that individual had. So I'm not even sure what happened there. But I think you're doing the right thing, but I would say there is a possibility of overanalysis. So.
Well, thank you, Mr. Leonardis, for your input on that. I think I do want to address the concern that people see things very differently, and this is a classic illustration of that. There are serious communication difficulties between the city manager and some of the council members. There are city council members who believe that there has not been a recognition of the specific instruction regarding improvement that was provided a few months ago. And there is input from city employees that there are issues that need to be addressed, and that we, and certainly I as a council member, do not want to be the one to follow up with the city employees. We don't have a structure for that, for each of the council members to have those interactions with staff and then come together. And we wouldn't be in a position where we could make decisions if we did that. We need to be able to make decisions about salary increases. We need to make decisions about performance metrics and specifics for improvements, and to facilitate overcoming the resistance that certainly I have seen to even communicating with me. And so this is a crisis, and the solution to the crisis is to have the investigation conducted correctly. And that's where the professional firm comes in. So I want to see this go forward. I'd like to see it go forward this week. If council doesn't agree and thinks that a week later, we should come back and talk about this again, I'm completely open to that. But I think this is not just my concern. I think this is shared by others on the council, and I think it is a concern for our city and whether it's going to hold together or whether we're going to see things going downhill. I want to see improvement, and this is the path to improvement, to open minds and open communications, and to provide tools to the council, myself included, and to our city manager to get that improvement moving. Because if it doesn't move forward, it's going to move backwards. That's worth $7,500 to me, and to do it and do it right. If somebody has an idea how to do it better, let's talk about that. But let's not talk about how we limit the scope and how we tie the hands or how this year is different. Let's talk about how we can be given the tools to do our job as best possible. So if people are ready to go forward with that, great. If people have an idea of how to do it better or how I'm wrong, I'm all ears. Councilmember Lawler.
Well, if I can just chime in
No, Mr.
one more
Leon,
time, Mr.
you may
Mayor.
not chime in. You may not. Council is discussing this. If we have questions for you, we will ask you, or I will give you time at the end. Councilmember Lawler is recognized.
All right. Thank you, Mayor Luthold. Just to be clear, we had agreed to a 360 review. I wasn't aware that at our closed session that we were talking about a full performance review. So coming out of that, my understanding was we were getting a contract for a 360 review. So I am concerned, why I'm fine with the review. I just feel like we're doing a lot more than what we initially had agreed to do. I understand that there are concerns, but I also understand that there's a lot of positive feedback. And there are some of us who have no concerns and are very happy with performance. So what I'd like to be clear is that we had agreed to a 360 review, and I feel like we're being railroaded with a full review. So I would suggest, if we are going to do a full review, that this would be the annual review date every year going forward, so that there will be another full review this time next year. I feel like we're pushing into something that either could be dealt with in the fall or closer to the annual review date, because we reviewed them in December. My understanding was that we review employees on the annual hiring date. So I'm not sure where the July date came from in his contract. I don't recall that. But what I'm saying is, if we're going to do a full review, then this is a full review period. And then this time next year will be the full review period. Because I do feel like we're being pushed into something that I don't recall agreeing to. I agreed to the 360 review, which I think is great. And I agree with you. I think we all need to have work hard and seek what's best for our community. Absolutely. And we can continue to give our city manager that feedback. But at this time, I think a 360 review is what would augment what we've already done.
Thank you. My understanding, Ms. Lawler, is that a 360 review, we've got a little bit of a definitional issue here. My understanding of 360 is, as was described, both up and down, whereas the component that was labeled as 360 in this scope of work was the downward looking or outward looking only, as opposed to the upward looking towards the council. I hear what you're saying, and I actually agree with what you're saying entirely, which is I think that this should be the review and the review period. I'm completely on board if we do this as a full scale review, setting this up as the annual review around this time of year. And that fits with the budget as well. Councilmember Mekachek.
I echo Councilmember Lawler's concerns and the issues that she raises. I do not think that this timing is optimal because I don't think it fits with the budget cycle. And I think it should be, if you're going to change change the rate of pay, the compensation, it should be in the fiscal year. And the reason why I say that is I think that it's easier to tie the city manager's performance to the goals that the city council sets each year. And those goals are embedded in the city budget. So to have a performance year different than a budget year, different than a city council objectives year, to me doesn't work. So those are my thoughts. I would agree that it's, and I wasn't part of that meeting when the 360 review was described, but I understand the perspective, and I think the scope at this point is too broad. But if this is to be the quote full review, then I also think the timing doesn't work. But you know, maybe we are overthinking this. There's 5 council members and there's 5 or 7 employees, contractors. I mean, we are tiny. We're a postage stamp, and I to some extent I think we are overthinking this. And as well, COVID. It's not like we've been through COVID before. This is completely different, and people at all levels of government have struggled with the past 14 to 16 months.
Thank you. Mayor Pro Tem Elahi.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of things to consider, but I'm sure we will be competent to consider all these things when they come up. And I agree with Councilmember Lawler. Let's do it as a full review, because we don't want to be doing this every 6 months, and have it tied up next year again to do it the same budget. Now, as far as the monetary compensation or raises are concerned, we can always look at the budget cycle and see when those would be effective, but at least we can look at the number. So I would move to have it done a full review, and also set a time for having an annual review at the same cycle, and get some feedback that gives us a complete picture of, you know, what we need to do to improve the city council, the city manager, and the staff, and maybe run the city. So I think if you can go in that direction, get it done once and get over. I hate to have things be done again and again and again. And it took us a long time just to hire the city manager. It took us a while now to try to review them, and now we're doing another review. So let's just do it once. And I'll agree with Councilmember Laurel. Let's do it as a complete performance review. And you know, if a raise comes out of that, give the gentleman a raise. If a raise doesn't come out, it doesn't. And then we can consider everything that comes in. That, you know, if the performance wasn't as best as we could expect, you know, we can consider whether there was pandemic issues or some other issues. And if it was better than we expected, then, you know, that'll be wonderful for all of us. And that's what our goal is, to make the performance as best as it can be and make it even better for the following year. So I would move to have this done as a complete review, and also we have set it up as an annual review on that basis. And as far as the compensation is concerned, it would then be considered based on where our budget is at.
Councilmember Lawler, you're beginning to raise your hand.
While I appreciate Mayor Pro Tem Elahi's support of my suggestion, I also believe that Councilmember Mekachuk is right in aligning it with our budget process. That actually makes sense. That's streamlining things. We're not spending money here and there doing things. I think that makes a lot of sense to align it with the budget process.
So Councilmember Lawler, Councilmember Mekachuk, where would you align it with the budget process? Would you say we put this off until May of next year and don't address any of the concerns for now? Or how do we address these issues and make sure that our performance goals and the input of staff is added in here? So since I asked you the question, I think even though Mr. Mekachuk has his hands up, if you have a comment first, Ms. Lawler.
Oh, Councilmember Mekachuk could go ahead first if you'd like.
Thank you. I would see, if it takes approximately 6 weeks to go through this process, I could see this process starting the middle of March. So then we'd have everything wrapped up by the beginning of May so that it would give us time to fully include everything in the budget as well. We would know where we are with our with the goals that we set for the year ending June 30th, 2022. And that's the timing I would see. But in terms of dealing with things right now, if we could have Ms. Levine's firm do something, maybe it's the survey tool, but also some discussions with the staff members. I think that's warranted right now, and that would form a baseline for where we are going to be next March 15th when we revisit this. And in terms of the cost, I think that those would be dollars well spent. Some today, and then doing the full review, for lack of a better term, the full meal deal in March, starting March 15th, 2022.
Yeah, I think I hear what you're saying, and I appreciate the point, which I think I heard there, which is we need the staff input right now, and we probably need some council kind of input, feedback, facilitation to improve communications between council and city manager all the way around. I mentioned before, and I'll point it out again, I know Mr. Leonardis is here. He has not been making the weekly reports that he made that everyone appreciated a lot. I heard feedback at one point that he said he quit doing it because it wasn't in his contract. I don't know if that's true or not. And the reason I don't know if it's true or not is because he has avoided speaking with me for the past 4 months. And that's obviously not right and appropriate. Our regularly scheduled call, he's not making it. So the improvement on this end of the communications has got to be made, or not. If Mr. Leonardis wants to cut me out, that may be a choice he wishes to make, but I want the rest of my council to be aware that he is doing that. And he's the city manager who's paid to do this job and to communicate with the council. It's not the other way around. So I think the input, I hear what Mr. Mekachek said, and I think that input of staff is absolutely imperative right now, because otherwise in this market, I don't know that our staff's going to stick around unless they are very satisfied with the management directly, and then the council as well, because it's a great market to look for a job in. We need to make sure that our city is doing well so that it continues to do well. So I think I like what I'm hearing from Mr. Mekachek's comment, which is we do move forward now. We do get staff input now. We do get some facilitation now to look for improvement. And then we get this on the budget cycle because quite frankly, it was frustrating for me that we didn't address the issue of Mr. Leonardis potentially getting a raise because it fell in such a weird position when we were looking at this too early and then too late. So I guess the question is, do we have consensus to go forward on this contract today, or do we need to kick this over to the next meeting? Everybody think about it a bit and come back, hopefully having Ms. Turner available as well so that she can add her input, or do we have consensus at this point? Let's hear from Councilmember Mekachek and then back to Councilmember Lawler.
Councilmember Lawler, go ahead.
All right, thank you. Given the importance of this, I really think that we should have a full council. I'd like to make sure that Councilmember Turner has an ability to also be a part of this process.
Councilmember Mekachek.
I was just going to ask Ms. Levine. She's been listening to the council members and also the city manager for an hour now, and I think she's probably getting a feel for our organization, at least from the council to the manager level, and maybe she has some advice on what she could do in terms of a scope today at this point in time, so that it would fit into doing another, having another engagement in 2022 before our budget cycle. Mayor Luthold, if you could facilitate that.
Yeah, Ms. Naveen, I think that that is an excellent question in terms because we did do the evaluation and then some updating to it when some issues arose in from the January to April time period. You've heard what we've talked about here today and the idea of getting it on the cycle closely associated with the budget cycle. Do you have some input about how we might modify the scope of the short term so that then we do get on that cycle correctly?
Thank you. What I would suggest, given what I'm hearing, that you would like to and get staff feedback, and let's call the 360 now staff feedback, staff and perhaps a few of your contract tour representatives, do a survey. And then I need clarification because I also heard perhaps a survey was not sufficient, that you would prefer confidential interviews that I had with individuals. And I would need clarification on that. So that would be that piece. I would give you, again, without attribution, so it's completely confidential, I would give you back a report about what I'm hearing, what I did hear, themes. And then again, I'd like clarification on this. If you're looking also at this point for us to perhaps facilitate in some way between the council and the manager on some issues or concerns that council members are having, or what actions you indicated in the review that was finished into the calendar year and what progress has been made on that. However, it would not include formal interviews or input in terms of surveys from the council. So that's what I need clarification about. And I think that's very doable. And then that would prepare you to begin in March or April to do the more formal one where the council does both survey, does interviews, and we also look at if there's, at that point, if you want staff input as well. So I hope I haven't muddied it more. I'm trying to think right now as I'm hearing what could be done.
Thank you. I think that does clarify. And I think if I was perhaps hearing Councilmember Mekachek correctly or reading between the lines a little bit on this, I think I'm liking what I'm hearing in the sense of perhaps interviewing staff or stakeholders, using the time instead of saying that interview time necessarily with council members, but putting that interview time with the staff, since it is so limited, getting those confidential interviews, getting that feedback, and then bringing that back to council, then we will be in a much better position to discuss that feedback and see exactly where we are in total. So I think that sounds like an excellent use of the hours, given that we have such a small staff and given the benefits, I think, of that confidential input. Councilmember Mekachek, did I interpret that correctly, and did I see you nod?
Yes, you did. And while I appreciate that Councilmember Lawler would like to have Councilmember Turner's input before making a decision, I could go along with that today because I believe that that would be consistent with Councilmember Turner's desires. I can't see it being a long ways off that. So I would support that.
All right. Thank you. Mayor Pro Tem Elahi, did you have any thoughts about what you've just heard?
No, I think it's fair. Let's move forward, and the extra time we have will be well spent. So, we need to get some things taken care of. We can't just bury our head in the sand and hope things get better. So this is going to help everybody.
I see Sergio clicked on, but did you want to talk, or should I go ahead and ask Councilmember Lawler? Are you okay with that idea of putting this, really putting the scope on employee interviews, and then bringing feedback to council and helping us facilitate use of that feedback in a positive way?
Yes, because that's exactly what I thought that was the goal to begin with. So yes.
All right, where's my thumbs up symbol? Mr. Rudin, it sounds like we're simply clarifying the scope of work a little bit to dedicate the interview time that was otherwise within the scope of work to going ahead and making that into the employee interview side of things. Are we okay to go forward on that?
Yes, although I think it would probably be safer and more straightforward to continue this item to August 3rd and to have the council direct that we bring back a revised scope of work in writing for approval. That would just avoid any sort of ambiguities. And I would want to make sure Ms. Levine and her firm have no concerns about the revised scope of work, which sounds like it would need to include a survey of staff and interviews. And then Ms. Levine mentioned a potential facilitated discussion with the council and the city manager, which seems reasonable, like a reasonable suggestion under the circumstances. Is that all right with you, Ms. Levine?
Yes, we can easily revise the scope to reflect what I have heard this evening.
All right, so hearing that, it seems like it does make sense now. Today seems like it's been quite productive in the sense of getting this clarified and really finding that correct path forward. So I'm glad we had this discussion today, and rather than just simply seeing this scope of work next week and then having it go out even further. So this is actually beneficial, and Ms. Levine's spending the time with us, listening in, and getting this direction sounds good. So with that, I guess I would put forth, unless someone wants to say differently, let's go with the revision to the scope of work and bring this back on August 3rd. I see nods all around. So in which case, this will be I guess a non-action item, or Mr. Rudin, do you think we need an action to direct to bring it back?
No. I think if there's council consensus, staff can ensure that this item is brought back once we have a revised scope of work to put before the council. Assuming that it's consistent with the direction council has in the discussion, I think that this could be an item for the consent calendar as well.
All right. And Councilmember Mekachek put his hand back down. So anything further?
I was going to suggest that it be a consent item, and City Attorney Rudin said that, so that's why I should my hand up.
All right, thank you. And so yeah, and obviously we can arrange next session if Ms. Levine will be available to us briefly in case somebody pulls it from the consent calendar, but otherwise it sounds like it'll be quite straightforward. All right. If there is nothing further, I will go ahead and adjourn the meeting and see you all on August 3rd. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.
Bye.